Hi, today is January 8th, 2003. Bryce Baldwin here with Josh Baker interviewing James Kane, a Korean War veteran. What is your full name?
James T. Kane, K-A-N-E.
Where and when were you born?
I was born April 1930 in Utica, New York.
What was your pre-service education?
Just high school.
Just high school. When did you enter the service?
Well, I was in the National Guard in sometime in the latter part of 1950. I joined the National Guard, and then we were mobilized in the spring of 1951. So that's when I went in.
Did you enlist or were you drafted?
Well, no, I was in the National Guard. So our unit got called into federal service.
Where did you receive your basic training?
Camp Edwards, Massachusetts, Cape Cod. Beautiful place.
Nice. What was your basic training like?
Actually, basic training wasn't that extensive. We were an anti-aircraft artillery battalion, and so we didn't have infantry basic training, and so it wasn't that long. We did the typical things. You had crawl under barbed wire with live ammunition firing over you, and long road marches, and obstacle courses where you swung on ropes and all that, but it wasn't really that extensive. It certainly wasn't like infantry basic.
Were you trained for something special?
Yeah.
Basic training? What
Yeah.
was that?
Yeah, they sent me to a school at Fort Dix, New Jersey for 3 months after basic for Morse code radio operator. And so when I finished that, I was qualified to do Morse code, and that was the reason I got called to Korea, because I had a specialty that they needed.
How prepared did you feel after leaving basic training?
Truthfully, well, for the job that I was going to do, a radio operator, I was adequately trained. But for a time when I got to Japan for assignment to Korea, they said, all of you forget what your military specialty is, you are now riflemen. And they gave us an M1 rifle, 5 rounds of ammunition, went out to the firing range to zero in your weapon, and said, okay, from now on, you're a rifleman, which is terrible because I had no training for that at all. But then I happened to get hurt shortly after that, hurt my knee, and that changed the whole picture. So then the doctor said, well, you can't be a rifleman with that injury. So I went to Korea as the job I should have had in the first place, radio operator.
I saw that you had a long trip, 12,000 miles, from Camp Edwards, I believe, to North Korea.
Yeah.
And what did that consist of, and what experiences did you have, and what did you do to pass the time on the trip?
Okay, well, looking back, it was really an unusual experience. I didn't think so at the time, but because I was pipelined, I wasn't with a large contingent of troops. There were just a few of us. And so we made our own arrangements, took the train from East Coast to the West Coast, and in the wintertime. And first of all, I'd never been in California before, and we arrive in the Sacramento Valley, and here's the wintertime, and there's palm trees and green grass, which is kind of unusual sight for someone from New York. But the train trip lasted, let's see, Saturday night we left the East Coast and we got to California on Tuesday afternoon. It was kind of an uneventful train trip, but then after we got processed at this place called Camp Stoneman in California, we then took a ferry boat out San Francisco Bay to Fort Mason, which is downtown San Francisco. From there, we took the troop ship, 4,500 GIs, 15-day straight shot to Yokohama, Japan, then a train to outside Tokyo, did a little training there, another train all the way down to the southernmost part of Japan, a seaport called Sasebo. Then we take an overnight Japanese ferry boat to Busan, Korea. Then I take a truck to Daegu, do a little training there, then a train to Seoul, an airplane to Chuncheon, another truck up to Hwacheon, which was my final assignment. So it's kind kind of unusual, but at the time I didn't think so. Looking back on it, I realize it now.
In Korea, what were your duties?
Radio operator.
And-
And it was split up into two functions. One, we were the second ROK Corps, Republic of Korea Corps headquarters. So we had one network that was just for our Corps. We had 3 Korean infantry divisions, we had an American field artillery brigade, and we were responsible for all the communications within the Corps. But then we were also a satellite station for a military communications network throughout Korea. So we had 2 functions. We were the head station for one, and then we were just a satellite for another.
So when you were doing this radio operation, what were your hours during the days? Or
Interesting. We were kind of short-handed, so I don't recall how many radio operators we had, but just a handful. And we were supposed to have 2 on duty every 8 hours. But when we were short-handed, sometimes it would be just 1, especially during the middle of the night when traffic was light. So we had a swing shift. The first shift would be 8 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon, and then the next one 4 to midnight, and then the midnight to 8 in the morning, which was the worst one because it was dark and scary, and you didn't know what was going on around you. But that was pretty much the schedule. So quite often you'd be sleeping during the day.
who were you communicating on the radio to?
Well, as I said, within our Corps, we were communicating with the Korean divisions and the Field Artillery Brigade. But then on the other network, we were, with headquarters and with all other units that were around us.
What did you do while not on duty in Korea?
Well, after I got my assignment up north, there really wasn't a heck of a lot to do. There was no nearby town, no civilian population around. It was, I guess, reading. We had a shortwave radio. We saw movies once in a while. That was about it. There really wasn't much going on.
So did you find yourself bored at all, or?
Well, no, not bored, because it's a situation where
You're not really.
no, you're alert.
Not get bored.
Yeah, it's not boring, and I think I mentioned in my write-up that there didn't seem to be a lot of homesickness.
Mm-hmm.
I had never been away from home before, but I didn't particularly feel it at that point, and most of my peers seemed to feel the same way. We were just kind of concentrating on what we had to do, and didn't worry about being away from home so much.
Did you ever face combat while in Korea?
No, I was several miles back from the main line. The things that we worried about, there were a lot of landmines around the area, and there was always the possibility of infiltrators coming in, and they were usually at night, and they didn't use rifles, they used knives, and there were some instances where some people were killed that way. But no, I wasn't a rifleman, so I was spared that.
So what was your opinion of the North Koreans and the Chinese?
Well, very low. I mean, as opponents, they were very formidable, very dedicated, but that whole communist philosophy to me, is just brutal. It's no way to live, and you could see how the South Koreans felt about it. I mean, they hated the communists, and of course they were devastated. Many fathers and mothers were dead, there were orphans all over the place, and so the evidence of how bad communism is was all around.
Yeah, I saw in your write-up that the weather was pretty rough sometimes. Can you explain that?
Okay, well, it's similar to upstate New York, where I was. I was in the lower part of North Korea, and it's cold in the winter and snow. The rivers freeze, so forth. And of course, you didn't live in a permanent building. We were in tents, and so it was kind of cold at night. And we had latrines, which meant you had to go to the bathroom. You had to go outside, and in the middle of the night when it's freezing cold is kind of uncomfortable. Summers were quite warm, not awfully humid. It wasn't a jungle situation at all. I felt I was fortunate. And growing up in upstate New York, I was kind of used to that environment, so it didn't seem to bother me. When I first got there, our clothing wasn't really the best, but then as the winter of 52, 53 came on, we got much warmer boots and field jackets and things like that, so it made it easier. Sleeping bags were much better.
What about the monsoon season?
Yeah, that was quite an experience, because you know how it is around here. It rains for a couple days and everybody is sick of it. Well, there it rained about 2 weeks steady, and just night and day it rained, and it was washing out bridges and roadways and so forth. And one night we got called out in the middle of the night to sandbag our bridge, or otherwise it would have swept away. So monsoons are pretty tough to handle.
Did you ever have any interaction with the people of Korea?
Yeah, limited. When I first got there, I was in Busan briefly, which is far from the battles then, and then I did a little training in a fairly large city called Daegu, and there was interaction there. Picked up a few words of the language and got to know a little bit about the culture, and I kind of admired the Korean people, because they had a hell of a life after the war started, and they managed to survive. And, but as far as large interaction, no, didn't really have that much.
What was the most interesting or inspiring thing that you experienced during your service?
Most interesting. I don't know if I could pick out a certain thing that I would say most interesting. It was just a combination of sights and odors, and you know, the experience of seeing people from, you know, a very different culture. So I guess there was really, from that standpoint, nothing outstanding. I can't think offhand anything.
What are the people that you most remember, and do you still have any contact with them?
Okay. We had as I said before, our group KMAG, we were a very small number of Americans attached to a huge Korean organization. They had thousands of Korean troops, and we were just like 50 or maybe 100 Americans, so we were fairly close knit. I had maybe 10 fellows that we were all fairly close because of the jobs that we did and so forth. Our ages were similar, and a couple of them in particular kind of encouraged me to continue my education when I got out of the Army, because they had already started theirs, and they said I could easily do it and use the GI Bill. Let's see, what was the other part?
Do you have any contact with them?
Other kinds. For a while we did. We used to exchange Christmas cards and notes and so forth, but after a few years, for whatever reason, it just sort of petered out, so now I have no contact with anyone I was in Korea with.
While you were there, did you receive any decorations, medals, or commendations?
Not as an individual, just as part of the group. Yeah, I got. I have the United Nations Service Medal, the United States Korean Service Medal. We did get a Korean Presidential Unit Citation, and now there's another medal that's just come out a couple of years ago. The Korean government is presenting a Korean Service Medal to all the Americans who were physically there during the war, and I'm supposed to get mine within a couple of weeks, I guess.
What does the KMAG stand for?
Okay, KMAG, we call it KMAG, Korean Military Advisory Group. And this was an organization that even a lot of Korean veterans probably aren't aware of. We were just a small cadre of Americans scattered throughout the country, providing support to all the Korean organizations, the corps, the divisions, the headquarters, so forth.
While you were there, could you tell the difference between North and South Koreans?
No, not by looking at them, no. The physical size and the appearance and hair and coloring and everything were all the same, just if they had a different uniform.
No. So what year did you get out of the war?
I left, let's see, I came home in January of 1953, and the war was still on.
What did you do after you got out of the war?
Well, it's interesting that the timing was such that when I got home and got discharged, that was right about the time of college spring semester starting. And I then had the GI Bill, so I immediately enrolled in college. I wasn't out of the Army a week and I was in college, which was really a big change. And I'm glad I did it that way because I didn't lose any time at all.
If you had to do it all over again, would you?
Oh, yes. At the time, I wasn't particularly eager to do it, and when I got my orders to go to the Far East, I wasn't too happy about it, but once I got there, I figured I was doing something useful, and even though I was just contributing in a minor way, it was important, and so yeah, I would do it again.
Well, that's all the questions I have. Is there anything else that you want to share with us, any other stories you got? Or
Oh, sure.
Yeah, pictures, all the other stuff that you have.
Sure.
Incorporate, tell us a story.
One, I thought I just happened by accident be in Seoul at an important time in history. Yeah, there it is.
You just show it up in there.
Oh, I don't know if it'll show, but
Yeah, you just zoom in on it.
okay, this is a picture of the main train station in Seoul, and there's a banner over the top, and I can quote from it a little bit later. My picture wasn't very good, but this was to welcome President-elect Eisenhower to Korea in late November of 1952. During the campaign for the presidency in 1952, General Eisenhower said that if he were elected as president-elect, he would go to Korea personally to see what he could do about ending the war soon. So he was elected, and so he immediately made plans to go to Korea, and he actually arrived there on November 29th of 1952. This picture was probably taken just before he got there, and the banner, should I read this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
The banner reads, the big thing was, "Welcome President-elect Eisenhower, unification under free Korea, drive away the Chinese Reds, disarm North Korean puppet army, strengthen Republic of Korea forces, we support withdrawal of United Nations forces." So I thought that was historically kind of important, at least for me. And let's see, I do have a picture here, it's probably not even worth showing, but it happens to be the bridge over the Pucon River at the 38th parallel where the war started in 1950.
Wow. Any other pictures and other things that are important?
Well, I have several pictures here of friends of mine, like from back home, that I happened to meet. One was a fellow named Jim Kennefick, who was a year ahead of me in high school. We both played basketball together in high school. And he was in a different organization. He was actually a platoon leader in the infantry, and he got wounded. And he got shot in the arm, and he ended up in the hospital. Then when he got out of the hospital, he contacted me. He found out where I was, and he came to visit me one day. So that was kind of nice. Another fellow, Bill Sheehan, that I grew up with, we went to grammar school together. I think he was located in Chuncheon, and we found out that we weren't that far away, so we got together and spent a day. Then another time, I had to drive way down through Seoul, almost to Incheon, in a place called Yongdong-po, which was our 8th Army signal supply depot. I had to get some parts for our radio. And I walk in the door, and who's the guy handing out the parts? A fellow that I was in grammar school with, and we didn't know that either one was in Korea. Let's see, I'm not sure if any other, well, I have some, oh, here's an interesting picture. I always like this one. I copied that on my computer, but this is I believe that garb signified he was a retired farmer. And some of the pictures are quite small. They're not all that good. Oh, here, this is me. I was probably 21 years old then in Korea.
I also saw in that write-up, you said, you talked about the food there?
Food?
Yeah, the food of, did you eat their food?
Oh, no. No,
Korean?
it was absolutely forbidden to eat Korean food or drink the water untreated, because one thing the Korean, I suppose maybe they still do it in the farms, they use, among other things, they use human waste for fertilizer, and I mean that's a killer for an American. And so we were told, do not eat their food, you're going to get sick, you could die. And our water was always treated with some sort of a chemical, and it was put in what they call Lister bag. It's like a big canvas bag or something, and it tasted awful because it had so much purification, but at least it didn't make you sick. But actually, getting onto the subject of American food, strangely enough, the food in Korea I thought was better than what we had in the States when I was in basic training or in school.
What were you served?
Well, of course, we didn't have milk, we didn't have ice cream. I don't think we had fresh eggs, but we had things like powdered eggs, powdered milk, if anybody wanted it. Nobody seemed to. On Thanksgiving and Christmas, we had turkey with the trimmings, which was nice. We seemed to have vegetables, bread. Coffee was always available. They always had coffee day and night. So actually the food in Korea wasn't too bad.
Who prepared the meals for you?
We had a small mess tent and I guess 1 or 2 cooks. And it was kind of open almost any time because we all worked strange hours. It was not like everybody getting together and having dinner at 6 o'clock. That wasn't the environment. So you just sort of ate when you needed to.
What about the things in the box?
Okay, I really don't have a heck of a lot to show, but for example, I kept some old money. These are, let's see, these are Korean won, W-O-N, and when I was there, 12,000 won equaled $1 US, and this was 100 won, so they were pretty useless, but I just kept them for souvenirs. And then I think I have, yeah, this was a Japanese yen. This was 10 yen. And I think when I was in Japan briefly, a yen was worth, well, I think it was like 360 yen to $1. So again, it wasn't worth much. And then this is a little thing, we call it scrip. It was a military currency only because there were no stores or anything around. So you used these if you wanted to buy little odds and ends. And then I have, these are some of the ribbons, and for some reason I kept my dog tags. And
What about the lighters?
yeah, I guess this is upon leaving. There was like a little party, and this was KMAG, and that was our shoulder patch, an eagle. In fact, it was an interesting shoulder patch because most of them were infantry, 3rd Infantry, 2nd, 45th, all these big numbers, and ours was unusual, and it was KMAG. I had a picture here, but a color. Oh, well, I can't find it right now. Oh, yeah, here it is. Yeah, that's what the KMAG patch, we wore that on our left shoulder. And
What was the other one? What was the other one in there?
oh, this.
Yeah, what is that?
Oh, I picked that up in Japan, I guess. It was, I don't know if it would show on there's a camera. Yeah, I don't know if it would show that, but it was just a little souvenir. It showed sort of like highlights of Japan with Mount Fuji. It's one thing I probably should mention that I had the opportunity on 2 occasions out of the train in Japan to see Mount Fuji, and that is just a gorgeous sight, especially in the wintertime, because it's a almost perfectly shaped cone with snow on the top, and it's very beautiful if you see that against the blue sky. And it's really the most most famous picture of Japan that you'll probably ever see. It's on everything, calendars and pictures and advertising. It's just very well known. And I saw it twice. That was impressive.
What about the other U.S. soldiers that were out there? like that weren't like radio people? Were they friendly to you, or did they keep to themselves, or what was your?
Okay, I never really thought too much about it. In a way, we were a little bit isolated from everybody else because we had our own schedule, and actually we made so much, the radios made a lot of noise, especially at night. The squawking and making a lot of sounds. Sometimes you had to be loud to get heard. And so consequently, here was this huge, in this valley we were in, the main 2nd Rock Corps, all their headquarters and all the people. And then we were stuck right at the very end of it, where they carved out the side of a mountain, and our trucks were in there with the radios mounted on them and sandbagged for protection. And that's where we operated from. So actually we were kind of isolated from the rest. And so now that I think about it, I hadn't really thought about it before, we really didn't have an awful lot of contact with others. And then of course there were so few Americans there at the 2nd Rock Corps that it wasn't like being in a division or a regiment or something like that.
So they treated you the same, or they?
Oh yeah,
You're a radio man. You're not anything.
Oh no.
I'm saying from the people that were like really doing combat.
Oh no, I don't think, because I don't think that was a factor. At least I never saw it, because everyone there had a job to do, even if you were a cook.
And
I mean, that was an important job. That was your job. You didn't choose it necessarily, and
exactly.
if you figured it was important that you did your job, whatever it was, and if you happened to be a rifleman or field artillery or radio operator or whatever, or truck driver or mechanic, I mean, that's just the way it was. And nobody seemed to resent the fact that, well, you do this and mine's much more dangerous. I never saw any of that.
Mm-hmm. What was the wildlife in Korea? Like, what were did you face like when you're in the out and about? Did you have to?
Yeah. Okay. Well, they had some pretty big snakes there, and I'm not much of a snake guy, so I gave them a wide berth. Interestingly, there weren't too many dogs around because, at least in those days, Koreans ate dogs, so you didn't see any doggy pets. Never saw anything like that. It wasn't a jungle environment, so you didn't. There weren't elephants or tigers or anything. But another thing, I have some pictures here. Maybe I didn't even bring them, but the pheasants that we're familiar with here in North America are actually Korean pheasants. That's where they come from. And so there was at least one of our guys that one time in the fall shot a couple of pheasants, and I happened to pose, for a picture. I just posed holding these dead pheasants. But as far as animals, they really weren't much of a factor. Now, if I had been in Vietnam, boy, that would have been tough for me because of all the snakes and like that Frank said, there were tigers and all this stuff. Boy, that would have been hard for me.
What was your overall feeling of your comrades toward the war? Were they like, what they want to?
I'd say, for the most part, they were like me. They felt that, well, we were doing something honorable. We were serving our country. We were helping to save Korea, South Korea, from communism, which we all learned firsthand was a horrible, horrible thing. So my impression, most of us, I guess, was fairly favorable. I know there was some sentiment against them because the war had devastated them so much, and there was so many orphans and everything. There was a lot of stealing going on. The Koreans would steal food, and I think they stole our movie projector one time, and things like that. And so some of my GI friends would get pretty upset about that, but I kind of took the attitude that, gee, if I was in this situation and I was starving, I'd probably maybe do the same thing. So my overall impression was the Korean, at my point being there, was favorable. Now, early on in the war, there was some pretty bad episodes of South Korean soldiers bugging out, just throwing down their guns and taking off. But I think you could understand it because they weren't well trained. They were basically farmers, and they didn't know much about warfare, and they were suddenly invaded. But in reaction to that, there was one Korean division, I think it was the 4th Korean Division, which had a terrible experience. They bugged out and left an American division unprotected. And so the president of Korea, the story that I heard, the president of Korea said that, we are going to create a top-notch division to replace it, and we'll never call it a division the 4th anymore. We'll call it the Capital Division. And it's my understanding that once they got trained and got in battle, they were good. And it's also my understanding in the Korean War, or not in the Korean War, I'm sorry, the Vietnam War, there was some sentiment of bringing over Korean troops, as part of our force. And I'm not sure that ever happened. I'm hazy on that, but if they did, they would have been formidable because they developed into a good, solid fighting force. Oh, and I might add too, thought just came to me. On one of our flanks was a Turkish infantry brigade, and I had a chance on one day, I don't even know what the reason was, maybe it's related to my radio duties, to visit them. And they had the reputation in Korea, on our side, of being the fiercest fighters of all. We had British, Canadian, Australians, Americans, and Greeks, I think, were there, and a lot of other countries. I'm not even sure how many, but the word was out that the Turks were the toughest. They relished hand-to-hand combat. That's the way their culture was. If they were going to be in battle, it was hand-to-hand, and they would kill anybody that came in their way.
So you had interaction with them?
Yeah, just briefly.
So did you get that a feeling from them?
No, you couldn't from the interaction that we had. I remember drinking some Turkish coffee, which is really different than ours. It comes in a small glass, and it's half milk probably, and they put a lot of sugar in everything, but it's strong. So I happen to remember Turkish coffee.
Did you have any interaction with any other cultures then, like Turks or? Like you said, the Greeks were there, or?
On the ferry boat that we took between Sasebo and Busan when I was going over, there was a Canadian infantry brigade along with the Americans, and so we had some interaction with them. Of course, we all spoke the same language, hardly any accent or anything, and that was kind of neat. And one thing, some of the fellas swapped boots because the Canadians wore a different style of combat boot than we did, and some of the GIs thought that was better than their own, so if they got someone with the right size and the Canadian was willing to swap, that they did it, but I never did. And I never met any English or Australians, but a lot of Korean soldiers.
Did you have any contact with your family when you're over in Korea?
Yeah, just by mail. Yeah, I guess now it's very easy through cell phones and everything. People, military throughout the world, they can call home or vice versa. But I never had a phone conversation. It was just mail, which was great because I don't care what war you were in, or if it was back in the Revolution or Civil War or anything. Mail from home is really important, and you as a recipient, it makes you think of home. But then your family is always worried about you, and so if you can write them something assuring them that you're okay, that's important to them. And then also packages. Every once in a while, I would get a package from home, and everybody else would. And we always tended to share it. Like if my mother sent me a dozen cookies or something, we'd share them around, and everybody else did the same thing. They were always welcome.
How long would it take for you to get something to them?
A package would take a long time, and quite often, like cookies would probably almost be stale by the time you got them. But they were welcome anyway. But yeah, it was a slow process. Mail, it must have taken a couple of weeks or so. It had to go through an Army post office in San Francisco, I guess.
So did the mail come right to you, or did you have to go get it?
Yeah, well, we were such a small outfit that it would come in centrally to our KMAG group in the 2nd Rock Corps, and then they would just hand it out. But it wasn't every day. Another thing too, I just happened to think about. I'm Catholic, and Sunday Mass is is part of the religion. And of course in Korea, if you were lucky enough to have a chaplain, then you could attend Mass regularly or go to confession or whatever. But we were such a small American outfit that we didn't have one, so we would, if word got out that there was a chaplain somewhere in the region and was saying Mass, then if we weren't on duty, we'd grab a Jeep and maybe go to it. And I remember one memorable one, I don't know where the heck it was up in the mountains somewhere, that we learned that a Catholic chaplain was going to be there, and so some of us who were off duty went, and it was out in the middle of Korea in the mountains, and the war is just a few miles away, and the chaplain puts on his, he's got fatigues on, but he puts on his clerical garb, and puts altar cloth on the hood of the Jeep, and the wine and the sacraments are there, and that was really impressive. I know everybody who attended that really felt it was something special.
You said when you were talking to our class earlier about your first flying experience, will you expound on that for us?
Yeah, that was really wild. This long, involved trip to get me from Camp Edwards, Massachusetts to Hwacheon, North Korea. One leg of it was flying from Seoul to Chuncheon, and I had never been in an airplane before, and I didn't have the slightest idea of what it was like, what to expect. And it was in the evening, and so we take off and everything seems to be okay. Then all of a sudden there's this big whoosh, and a window flies out, and debris is flying all over, and I said, oh my God, we're being shot down. And it turns out that a crewman came back and he looked at it and said, that's no problem, just the window fell out. And I said, oh my God. Then we landed and that was okay, and then I guess I didn't fly again for another year till I was coming home from the West Coast. But that was really a kind of a frightening experience for me.
Wow. Were the South Koreans hospitable toward you?
Yes.
And what did they do to show that?
Well, in country, they were always friendly. They tried to speak. They would teach us a little bit of Korean language, and we would teach them a little bit of English. And they were genuinely grateful that we were there, and you could sense it. And then, of course, I told the class that experience, which really impressed me. This was only 2 years ago, when my wife and I were in Italy on a trip, and we were in Florence this particular day in the hotel gift shop, and we walked in, and I was over in one part of it looking at some things, and my wife happened to be by the checkout counter, and there was an Oriental young lady, probably in her mid-20s, maybe 30 or so at the most, and my wife just said, oh, where are you from originally? And she said, I'm from Korea. And she said, oh, my husband was in the army in Korea during the war. She said, he was? She came right over to me and shook my hand and said, thank you for helping save my country. And I got goosebumps because it had never happened before. So I thought that was very important for me.
Yeah. Have you been back to Korea since that?
No, I wish I did. I understand that it's a very vibrant country now, very modern, a lot of manufacturing. It was basically, I thought, a beautiful country if it hadn't been for the war. And some years ago, the Korean government, this was maybe back in the 70s or so, the Korean government said that they were having a program in which they were inviting GIs like myself, whoever had served in Korea during the war, as guests of the Korean government. If you could pay your way to travel there, you would be the guest of the Korean government for like a week. They would put you up in a hotel, feed you, take you on tours, maybe show you where you were located. And I even went to the point of looking into it. I think on a business trip to California, I contacted, I think maybe someone from the Korean embassy or Korean Airlines or someone, and they told me, yeah, you can do it if you want to. And I was thinking about it, but then for some reason I never did. And then, mentioning things like this to my wife, about we travel a lot, and we've been to Europe and the Caribbean and a lot of places. And I've told her on occasion, I said, gee, if we went to the Far East on a trip, I'd sure like to go to Korea. But she doesn't want any part of it. She's just not interested. And she'd like to go to Japan or China or places like that, but not Korea, so I'll probably never get there.
Did you get along well with your post commander?
Well, didn't really. You mean in my where I was?
Yeah, wherever you were, basic leader.
Well, there's actually there was very little interaction. I don't even know who. I can't recollect who that might be, or even what rank he held, because we were just sort of on our own to do our thing, and that was it. I had another memorable thing. In the course of events, a general named Van Fleet, who was very famous at the time, became commander of the 8th Army, which was, he was the supreme commander of all the forces in Korea, you know, even foreign forces. He was the top guy, and he happened to come through our compound once on a little inspection, and I was off duty, so I was one of those that were, you know, at attention with our weapons and greeting him. And I do remember he was very personable, and each one, there was just a small group of us, and each one he shook our hands and asked us where we were from and how we were doing. So that was kind of memorable. But to answer your question, I don't really have much recollection of who our commander was or what his rank was or anything. I just didn't have any day-to-day dealings with him.
So did you guys ever get orders from? Did you guys get orders to do things from? Who did you get those from?
Okay, well, KMAG headquarters was down in the southern city of Daegu, and that's where I first went when I came from Busan, when I first got in country, to go through like a refresher course on radio procedures in Korea. And so that's whatever orders we got would come from there. But on a day-to-day basis, we didn't really have very many orders. We just responded to the traffic that needed to be sent, or whenever traffic came in that we had to receive. And if you have time, I might mention some of the things that go on, which I'm sure is totally different in the modern warfare. We used Morse code, and we were in the mountains, and it was very difficult to communicate, because every time you started your key, the enemy would start, they would react to it, and they would start jamming you. Mm-hmm. And they had a couple types of jamming. One was called like white noise, it was just blah, blah, blah. And then the other was bagpipes. It sounded like bagpipes, some kind of a musical thing, but just to obscure what you were trying to send. And we had, all our messages were coded. We had a little device not much bigger than this called an M209 code converter. And every day you set in a new code based on a coded message that you got. This is what you're supposed to plug in today to code your message. And so instead of saying a word like ammunition, you would take 5 letters of it and code it, and then another 5 letters. So a word in Morse code was always 5 letters, and it was gibberish. It was like A, Q, Z, G, A, whatever, and that's the way it was. And so if I was sending a message, I had a message here that I had to send, I would have this big sheet with all coded stuff. I didn't have a clue as to what the message said. You know, it was just code. And because it was so difficult to communicate in that environment, we had a procedure where after every 50 words, you know, I would just get on the key and start sending the words, and the guy on the other end, after 50, we had a procedure that he would stop, you know, I would stop, and then ask for a Roger, you know, which meant, did you receive it? And then, if he received it okay, he'd give me a Roger, and then I'd proceed with 50 more. And, you know, sometimes this could go on all night because of the long message. But every once in a while, which to our chagrin, you'd send, you know, 50 words, and then you'd say, Roger, and the guy would come back and say, give me everything after the first word. Because he had no way of breaking in, you know, he'd have to wait for me to send 50 words. And so again, when you're doing this, especially in the middle of the night and you're out in the middle of nowhere, it's pretty hard to do.
So also, how long would it take with the cranes jamming it?
Well, sometimes it got it's interesting. I haven't really thought much about it since then, but sometimes it was impossible to get it through because they just were so close to us and jamming as they were coming right down our antenna that we had to resort to landlines. or even in warfare now, you have telephone lines, telephone poles, and hard wire. And so we had that too. And we had these field telephones. You might have seen them in war movies or something where you crank. Yeah, and we call it double E8 phone. And what we would have to do, which is probably against regulations, but it was the only way we could do it, was to take a little piece of cardboard and put it, there was a butterfly switch. So when you use the telephone, if you spoke, you had it in one position, and then if to listen, you had to have it in another. And so we would take this butterfly switch and put a piece of cardboard in there to hold it open. Then you would put the microphone, the phone right there next to your key, and then you would go right in over the landline. And that way, they couldn't jam that because it was wire. So that's what we had to resort to once in a while.
So could you jam them when they did things? Or?
No, that wasn't our job. We had jammers.
Someone did that?
Yeah, there was somebody else's.
I wasn't sure if that was in the...
Yeah, we were strictly operating the radios.
Yeah. Did any of the soldiers or even you have any like superstitions about like how you like what you did or not, just for good luck or whatever? Or towards war?
No, I don't think so. I think if you knew your time was getting short, you probably got a little more careful about where you walked and what you did. Maybe got a little bit more scared of being alone at night out in the middle of nowhere. But I'm not aware of any superstitions. I'm sure there were plenty of them around, but I didn't have any.
You talked about the landmines and infiltrators. Did you have any experiences with anybody that you knew or? Well,
yeah, someone I knew. We were in this refresher course in Taegu together. We were both radio operators, and then we got sent to different places. And I heard subsequently that some night an infiltrator came in and killed him. So you were aware of that. And then the landmines were pretty well, minefields were pretty well marked, and you knew that you shouldn't go there. But on the other hand, you never knew if there was some, because there were a lot of paths around up through the mountains where we used to climb the mountains and stuff, that you never knew for sure if you're gonna hit one. So you were kind of always aware that there was a possibility.
So what did you do after you got out of the war?
Well, based on encouragement from my friends over there that had been to college and told me, hey, you're crazy if you don't go to college. And then we had the GI Bill, which made it possible, because I didn't have any money at all when I got home. As I said, the timing of the spring semester was such that, God, within a week of taking off my uniform, I was in college.
What college did you attend?
I went to Utica College. I was a physics major, and did that for 4 years. Then when I graduated, I came to work right here on Griffiths Air Force Base as a civilian engineer working for the Air Force for about 5 years. Then I went into industry as a defense electronics marketing guy. And I actually spent basically my whole working career here on Griffiths Air Force Base.
So do you think that your Army experience has helped with your career?
I mean, not only my career, my whole life. I didn't realize it at the time, but I guess it's important for people to realize that military experience, especially like if you happen to be in a war, is I don't know. It's unique, but it's so special that it gives you a different outlook on life and on politics and family and everything else. And so it really changed my life dramatically. It certainly allowed me to go to college, because I never would have been able to without it. It gave me very strong anti-communist political views, made me much more patriotic than I had been. When you grow up in a peaceful environment with a nice family and so forth, you don't really think too much about being American, how important it is. You see the flag, and it doesn't mean a lot, but after my experience, boy, the sight of the American flag it's always special, even now. I remember in particular when we were coming home on the troop ship, as we were leaving Yokohama Harbor to come home, we were all elated. We're going home, we're safe. We had a big American flag on the back of that ship, and I'll tell you, everybody just felt great seeing that there. Mm-hmm. And now, I go to a lot of sporting events, and they always play the national anthem and the the flag is always somewhere, and I just automatically turn towards the flag, and I don't say anything, and I just stand there. It's still emotional even now.
Well, that's all the questions we have. Do you have any other stories you can recall, or anything else you want to tell us?
Yeah, a couple things if you have the
Yeah,
time.
we got anything.
Okay.
Go ahead.
One, on this train experience, it was in the wintertime, and I don't know if you've ever heard in your American history the Donner Party. There was a disaster in the mountains in California between Nevada and California, where back in the 1800s, a wagon train party of settlers, they left the Midwest too late in the season to avoid the winter snows, and they got trapped in the Donner Pass, which is right at the top of, it's like at the summit of the Sierra Nevada mountains, and many of them died. They got trapped, and they resorted to cannibalism to survive. I mean, that's how bad it was. And anyway, this Donner Pass is noted for humongous snowfall. Every year, they just get bombarded. You know, we think we have a lot when we have 100 inches or so. I mean, they get several hundred. So anyway, the train that I was taking, I think it was called the City of San Francisco out of Chicago, just about 2 weeks before, and it was big national news, that train had got stranded in the same spot because of the snow. Here's a train in the 20th century is stranded, can't move because the snow is so deep. And they had to resort to emergency measures because people were getting sick. There was no food or fresh water or anything. And it was big headline news all over the country. Well, and here's a couple weeks later, I'm on the same train going through, but by then they had cleared the tracks. And I had, you know, being from here, I'm used to snow. But out there, I had never seen so much snow in my life. Going through Truckee, there's a little wooden train station with the name Truckee. The snow on the roof must have been higher than the building itself. It was like going through a snow cave.
Wow.
The train, you could look out the train and all you could see was snow, but then maybe you could look up and see the sky way at the top of this stuff. So that was kind of unique. You know, not that it was dangerous or anything, it was just kind of a unique experience. Let me think. What else? Oh, yeah, two things. On the troop ship coming home, they assigned you a compartment kind of loosely based on where you were from in the country. If you were from the West Coast, you were kind of in this part. If you were from the East Coast, you were over in another one. And one day, we'd just been a day or two out, and I happened to see a fellow that had a little AWOL bag, you know, a little carrying bag, and his name was Harold Burton. He said, Ilion, New York. I said, hey, Ilion. So I went over and spoke to him, and oh, geez, this is great, because we're both coming home, and we both had been in Korea, and we're the same age and everything. Well, it turns out that Harold and I became very close friends, because he came to work at RADC, and so did I, and we were in the same organizations, and he turned out to, after he left working for the Air Force, he became a field marketing representative just like me, but for a different company. So we were constantly spending time together, and that was pretty neat. And it all started there. But then the downside of that trip was that by mistake, it was a mistake on my part. I went one day to go into the John to shave or something, and I happened to leave my wallet on my bunk, and I had everything that I owned was there, $100 plus family pictures and everything, and somebody stole it. And I thought, how in the world could a fellow GI who's been through the same experience as me, how could he be so low as to steal that? And so then when we got to San Francisco, I had to apply for an emergency amount of money to get me home and get discharged and so forth. So that was kind of a downer, but basically it was a pretty good trip, because the other thing I should probably mention is when we left San Francisco on this troop ship, it starts from San Francisco Bay, and is just like being on a lake, it's very calm. And I had never been on a large ship before. So we go out onto the Golden Gate Bridge, and it's in the wintertime, and we immediately hit rough water. But I'm up on deck, and it's not bad. You can see the horizon, and I hadn't eaten recently, so I was okay. I didn't think anything of it. And then they said, okay, chow call. They announced all over the ships. So then mess hall is down a couple of decks, and it was kind of smelling everything down there. So I start to go down the gangway, and I didn't get to the first deck below. I got sick. I mean, everything was, you know, the ship was jumping around, and the odors and everything. I just lost it all, and I was sick for almost 5 days straight. I mean, I couldn't even eat. I wanted to die. I felt so bad, and you know, everybody said it, and I've learned since that on you know, like coming home and then on cruises I've taken and so forth, that it's really important to get fresh air, be up on deck, see the horizon, and also eat. Even if you don't think you should, at least get something down, because that helps the process. Well, man, I was really out of it for 4 or 5 days, but then finally I got over it, and then from that time on, it was a 15-day trip, and for the next 10 days or so, I felt great. And then the next year coming home, gee, not a problem at all. And I guess part of it's psychological, because, you know, going over you're really scared and you're apprehensive, but coming home you're pretty happy. Another thing I should mention too, now that all these things are coming to my mind that I hadn't really thought about before, when we came into San Francisco Bay on the trip home, it was late in the evening, and so because of the tide situation, we were told we couldn't dock. And so here we are, we're sitting out in San Francisco Bay. On one side, you could see the streets of San Francisco, the cars, all the beautiful lights and everything, all the activity going on. On the other side of us is Alcatraz prison with all the lights on and all the prisoners. So it was really a contrast. And we were saying, oh my God, why can't we get off this stupid boat? We'd been away for a year or more, and we've been on the ship for 15 days, and we're just dying to get off that ship, but we couldn't do it till the next morning.
You got anything else?
Let me think. I'll probably think of something later on. I guess the one point I would make is that you know, military experience is unique to everybody, and like Frank, who spoke to the class earlier, I mean, he had some really hairy experiences, much worse than mine. But let's see, I forget the exact point I was going to make. That it's not all serious every day, you know, grim. You know, you've got to do this, you got to do that. Watch your tail on that. There are some kind of light moments, and so I wouldn't want to leave the impression that being in Korea during war for me was just an endless days of really a terrible situation, because it really wasn't like that. Some days were bad, but some days weren't so bad. And looking back on it, it was probably the best thing that ever could have happened to me by far. I mean, it just totally changed my life for the better. Probably, yeah. Like I said, I'll probably
Remember it later.
think of some things later, but I think that's got it. How long have we been on here?
All right. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
How long did we? Probably an hour, huh?
Yeah, I think.